Hello, good evening. Happy Monday. We will go ahead and get started. I have a few announcements and updates and housekeeping type items as we have some folks still joining us. But welcome. My name is Shannon Sheehy. I am the Manager of Strategic Partnerships at CodeU, which is a nice fancy way of saying that I manage our careers team. So we have a really great team of career coaches and technical project managers and employer managers who help you all as you are wrapping up your time with us to get started on the job hunt. So we look forward to working with you on that. Before we get to our speaker tonight, just a few things. So one, we are working on, we're always working on making our slate of speakers. So we do have some upcoming on March 10th, we have Charles Kaiser, one of our mentors, presenting on Vanishing Point, Strategies for Online Privacy and Security. On March 31st, we have an employer spotlight for the Cincinnati insurance companies. And then on April 7th, we have a follow-up to the mental health workshop that we had a couple weeks ago. This one is going to be called Virtual Workplace Mental Health. So tips on how to maintain your mental health when working in a remote environment, which I think sounds like a really cool topic. Other than that, we are always working on finding speakers and finding topics. So if there is a specific speaker that you would like to recommend to us, or if you have a topic that you would like to hear from someone on, please let us know. I can't guarantee anything, but we try to find speakers that match your all's interests as much as we can. The second thing is our careers team is always working on engaging events, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. This week on Thursday, it is not our event, but it is an event going on for folks in Lexington called Undercover Lex. It is put on by our partners at Technology Association of the Bluegrass, so be sure to check that out if you're in the Lexington region. It's a really cool free event. The following Thursday, March 14th, here in Louisville, we are putting on an industry night event that's going to be very similar to the Undercover Lex event. So be sure to register for that if you're in the Louisville area. And then we're also going to be working on some more hiring events, both virtual and in person, throughout the rest of the year. Our team also sends out a Tech Careers newsletter once you've graduated from the program. So some of you may already be receiving that. But just some more things to look out for. I also want to give a plug. A while back, we changed the way that we were sharing jobs in Slack. So I just want to be make sure that everybody's aware of the different jobs channels that we have. If you are not in any of the jobs channels, you can go either to career resources in the second post, second most recent post there has all of them tagged, or you can search channels in Slack, just type in jobs dash, and then it'll give you all the regions as well as remote so that you can join those. Just want to make sure that you all aren't missing them because you're not added to them automatically. Finally, if you're a student who started in the August cohort, so those are folks who are about to start your capstone module, and you're attending as part of your career readiness requirement, please remember to fill out the form in your Google Classroom to get credit for attending. Just a couple admin housekeeping type things. Please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation unless you're asking a question or otherwise engaging. We just want to make sure we're cutting down on any of that background noise. Feel free to also throw questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go along and can help our speaker out. And we will try to have time for Q&A at the end. So tonight we are joined by David Brundage, who's one of our fantastic mentors. And David is going to talk to us about creating and launching an app. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Thanks so much for being here with us, David.
Thank you very much. So I have never given this presentation ever. So I'm going to try my best to do this in time. And if you have questions, go ahead and stop me and ask them. I'm not scary, I promise. And I love questions. So please just raise your hand. If you see me looking over this direction, it's because I have you all over here so that I can keep track, and then I have the presentation over here. And if my cats jump up from over here, I might get distracted, but we should manage. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I've have over 15 years in technology, mainly in the data analytics and data engineering space, a little bit of machine learning and software leadership. I have my doctorate in biomedical informatics, which means I like the combination of healthcare, clinical data, and technology. I am what I would call a hobbyist web and mobile developer, which means I've never professionally been one of these roles, but I build a lot of apps in my spare time, and it's something that I enjoy. And I'm just a general nerd. I like all things horror and vintage toys and anything kind of weird. And I'm sure you can't tell by the picture I chose and my background setting. I'm perfectly normal. So today we're going to talk about building and deploying mobile apps, specifically as a solo developer. And a lot of times you'll hear this kind of referred to as terms like indie hacking or kind of solo dev. But really, it's just willing to step out, try and build something, put it out into some public space, try and get people to use it, and try and create something. So we're going to cover a couple of different things in this presentation. We'll talk about some of the basics of mobile app development. How do I choose the right language and framework? What does it look like to develop and test and deploy these versus like a web app? What are the different app marketplaces like and requirements that they have? What sort of tools and resources would you use? I'll briefly touch on some common challenges and ways that you might overcome them. And then hopefully with time permitting, I'll actually show you behind the scenes of my app. We'll actually look at the one that I put out earlier this year, look at performance. I'll show you some of the code, and I can show you how I actually work through building that application. So who is this for? It's for everyone. You don't have to know any in-depth code or any in-depth development or marketing or anything about app development. I'll try and explain it as easily as I can, but if you have questions, just go ahead and ask them. But you don't need any sort of prior mobile development experience for what we're going to talk about. And mobile development can feel very daunting. I think it's one of those things where it's like, well, how do I get an app onto my phone? How does that process actually work? But it's actually really beginner friendly and it's quite accessible. A lot of solo developers start from scratch and have built very successful apps. We'll look at a couple in the very next slide. So whether you want to do mobile app development as a career, it's just something you want to do for side projects, maybe you want to get into freelancing, mobile development is a great option. I've only been doing mobile development now for about 3.5 months. So I haven't even been working on this platform for very long. I have experience with web development. I have experience with other coding languages, so it's easy to pick up. But it's not, I had to take and learn a lot as I went, but it wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it was going to be. So why? Why should you want to do this? Because anyone can build and deploy these by themselves. You can work on it at home. All you need is your computer. Most of the resources are free, and you can build a fairly successful application without needing to have a big team. There are lots of examples of apps that have started with just a single developer and are now in multi-million-dollar territory. So I put two up here that I found when I was doing some research for this. The first one is Wave, which is an AI note-taking app. It was started by a single developer, and it now brings in 4 million annual recurring revenue. So every year, this app is making $4 million in revenue. Another one is Slopes. This is another mobile app where someone came up with the idea of like, I don't know if people have those like trail running apps and like the running thing, Strata, is that what it's called? Something like that, where like keeps track of like the distance you ran. You could like share it with your friends and stuff. He built that, but for skiing. And that project is now bringing in $1 million in annual recurring revenue. Now, he's not doing that overnight. It's not like, all of a sudden he deploys his app and he's making $1 million. But over the course of multiple years, he's been able to build that app into something that is a full-time job. App stores make it really easy to distribute. I think one of the hardest things about like if you're building a business or an application is how do I get people to find it? How do I get people to, go to my website and sign up and sign into my thing? Well, app stores kind of corner the market and how you get applications onto your phone. So there are these great distribution mechanisms. People trust things more that come from an app store than just downloading something off of the internet. And a lot of that is because these app stores build in protection and ways to make sure that the application that you're putting it isn't as harmful. Now, there are still ways that can get passed, so don't trust everything you download from an app store. But for the most part, that should be true. Development tools for both iOS and Android are free. You can go download Xcode and iOS emulators on your Mac right now. You can go download Android Studio, which is the Java Kotlin Android development IDE, and you can access to all sorts of Android frameworks for completely free. And then there's just small fees, really, when you want to join the app stores when you're ready to deploy. So you don't have to do that part until you're ready to actually deploy. But Google, it's a one-time $25 registration fee to kind of sign up and set up your account. Apple, on the other hand, charges you $100 per year. So that's $100 no matter whether you release one app or you release 100 apps. You're at least paying them $100 to be part of their app store. As with everything these days, there are tons of online learning tools, frameworks that can make it to where you can move much faster. There's large communities around mobile app development. So there's just tons that you can work with and build as well. It's a growing market. There were more than 5 billion smartphone users in 2022, and it's estimated that the number is expected to cross 6 billion by 2028. It's just a massive amount of people using phones. I think something like 70% of the internet traffic now comes through our cell phones. People are increasingly using their phones more often. They've gone from an average of 3 hours spent on their smartphones to more than 4.5 hours on phones. That's still increasing as well. There's apps specifically to get you to use your cell phone less. That's how much people are on their phones. And the app market is estimated to continue to grow. $475 billion in 2022, and it's expected to grow across all segments up to 2027. You can see between the two app stores here, Google Play has many orders of magnitude more downloads of apps than iOS does. This is because Apple's more of a premium product, and Android is available in much cheaper and much broader, wider devices and areas. Makes it a little more accessible. So if you're really trying to capture a large market, then Android is kind of the direction you want to go. If you're trying to build more premium experiences, and as we'll look at potentially trying to monetize your application, then maybe looking at iOS and the App Store is more your speed. There are different types of mobile applications. What I mean by that is kind of like different frameworks and coding languages for building them. Not only is there an Android app and an iOS app, and I think there might still be some Windows phones that exists somewhere. I don't know if Windows completely discontinued that, but really the big two are Apple and Android, and they both have kind of platform-specific coding languages. So iOS, you build apps in a language called Swift, or Objective-C was kind of the older language, but now it's more primarily Swift. Android development used to be done all in Java. Now it is done in a language called Kotlin. They still support both, but even Google themselves are like, hey, you should really be building stuff in Kotlin. That's the direction that this is going and staying. Yeah, Brett.
That was an accidental tap, but I've been learning Kotlin myself. It's great. That's all
Awesome.
My little comment.
Kotlin's like Java with more features. I think it's a little more feature rich. I hate Java, so there's just no way I'm going to learn it. Like, that's just my personal opinion. Nothing wrong with it. And if you want to do Android dev and you're like only wanting to do Android dev, learn Kotlin. I hear Swift. I hear a lot of good things about Swift. I have no intentions of learning Swift. I like this second section. So I do cross-platform apps. I want to use a single code base. So let me talk about some pros and cons of each of these first, and then I'll get to that. So why would I use something, a native language? Well, maybe I want my app to have the absolute best performance and speed that it possibly can. It's critical that it runs flawlessly fast. That is where a native language will shine. There's not having to be any compiling from one code to the native language. There doesn't have to be any bridge that tries to communicate between something like React Native and a native language. It has, if your application needs access to all device features, every single thing that the device can do, you're likely to get more of that in a native app in a native language. Otherwise, someone has to either these cross-platform apps and languages either have to support that, or someone has to build a bridge or a way to use that feature. And so not everything is always supported. Now, maybe like 90% of it is, and that's enough for your application. If you want the absolute best user experience and you want the UI specifically to look like it was made and designed by Apple, well, then you really want to build a Swift app. If it can look like it was pretty close to something that was designed specifically by Apple and you're not really concerned about that, then maybe that's not a big deal. But there's drawbacks to this as well. So you have to have separate code bases. If I want to deploy both on iOS and Android and I'm building something in a native app, well, I'm either going to write that app in Swift and then have to rewrite that app in Kotlin, or I'm going to have to find somebody to take my app in Swift and rewrite it in Kotlin. So it can be much more expensive and time-consuming to develop if you're trying to deploy to the widest available audience. A lot of times, especially from like a business perspective, people are expecting apps to be available on both platforms. So unless you're really targeting a specific group or community, people are expecting it to be widely available. And that's where cross-platform apps come in. So these are single code bases, a single framework or language for developing both an iOS app and an Android app. There's two very popular ones currently. So that's React Native and Flutter. So React Native is actually a JavaScript, TypeScript-based language. So you can, the same React that you deploy to the web, you build within React Native. And then there is a bridge component, I believe it's called Expo. I don't work in React Native. It's on my to-do list to review, that can actually allow that React code to work with and bridge to the native infrastructure and run as a mobile app. So that's through Facebook. Facebook came out with React. They support React Native. So I guess Meta, whoever they are these days. And then there's Flutter. So Flutter is an open source framework for creating widget-based UIs. This is the tool that I use. It uses a language under the hood called Dart. Dart is a language developed specifically for building UIs, and then it's been expanded to now be completely, feature-rich development language. It is a strongly typed language. It kind of feels like a mix between Java and Python, a little more Python-y, so that's why I kind of navigate to it. That was my first language I ever learned. The pros of a cross-platform app is you can develop, very fast. There's a lot of frameworks that allow to build items very quickly. It saves time and cost. You don't have to use a single code base to deploy for both platforms. These are growing communities and support. I think that Google in their last Flutter day said that 28% of applications on the App Store are now written using Flutter and Dart. Flutter is open source, so people are often concerned, oh, Google kills projects. Flutter can't ever be killed. It is open source. It had a lot of community adoption. It may have lower performance. Like I said, React Native has to work through a bridge between the code and the device. Flutter has to be compiled into native code, and it can be slower because it's not as optimized. May not have access to all of the features. There's a third set category of apps. These are progressive web apps and web apps that you can build just like any other web application. And then there are tools like Tori and or Towery and a couple others that allow to actually create a shell for that application to then be installed. These can be much harder to get onto the app stores. You can get them into the app stores. So while I say it's can't publish in app stores, you can't publish them without going through one of these other mechanisms and services to actually get a progressive web app into the app store. But you can make it available. Someone could go, they could go to the website and you'll get that pop-up that says like install on your phone. Like that's essentially installing a progressive web app. Okay, so front end versus back end. Just like web apps, mobile apps have a front end and a back end as well. Slightly differently is that back end may be completely on device and nothing has to go and communicate with anything else, or that back end may be an API or some other back end as a service that is hosted someplace, and then the device is essentially acting like a client and communicating with a server. Front end is our user interface and our user experience. These are what people see and do and interact with on our device and our app. These are usually built using UI frameworks. Flutter is a UI framework as well. Swift UI, Jetpack Compose. There's I can't think of that. Bootstrap can be used in mobile apps with, I think, React. Any sort of like ShadCN, any sort of UI framework that you can use in React, you could use as well in a cross-platform application. And this is where you want to focus on making sure that you have a nice design, that your application is responsive, that all your animations work. Your backend is what manages your user data, your authentication, communicates with services, does kind of the business logic of the application. So app lifecycle between mobile app and any other sort of application development doesn't really change too much. We start with some sort of design, maybe a discovery process before that to decide what we're going to build. Then we start, creating some mock-ups and wireframes. We start doing some build and development. We test that. Once it's satisfactory to our testing standards or whatever testing we want to do, we deploy that someplace, and then we maintain that. Obviously, people are going to find bugs. Maybe we want to improve performance of something we've already released. Maybe a new feature gets added, and we just go through this whole process over again. So let's talk about design very briefly. First thing to do when kind of building any sort of app, especially a mobile app, is really just to start wireframing and prototyping. Don't need to write any code. You don't need to do anything. You just need to start laying out like what will your app look like and function. And there's lots of tools that you can use to sketch these out, like Figma and Sketch, ScalaDraw, Adobe XD. You can use pen and paper. I mean, that's what I did in my first app. Is I just started, here's what the outline of the phone's going to look like, and here are the different kind of boxes that I want to have, and each of these things will have some piece of information in it. Once you have that kind of wireframe or that prototype, you might start moving into the MVP stage, the minimum viable product. This is when you start taking that design and you start kind of creating the simplest version of what that app will be and what it will do, to where it only has the core features. You don't want to start going, well, I need to have it do this, and I need to have it, have dark mode, and I need to have all these other items, because that's not necessary to the core of what you're developing. So, for example, Uber, for their MVP, I think it was like you could only request a ride. There was nothing else. Like you press the button and someone would get pinged, like, oh, someone else would accept it. And then, like, even the routing and navigation, all that was done off the app. The app was just like, I need a ride, and somebody else could say, I'm coming to get you. That was it. Instagram, originally, before Facebook purchased them, you could only share a photo that had a filter. That was it. There was no stories, no messaging, no videos, nothing. It was post a photo, and you could apply a filter to that photo. So here's my little wireframe that I mocked up, and here's what the MVP of my app ended up looking like. As you can see, it's pretty close to what I mocked up in the wireframe. The only difference being like it's more details inside of these boxes. I just knew that they were going to contain something. I didn't know what that something was yet. I figured I'd get to that as I got along. I just needed to start looking at understanding what it would look like in my head. So now we're ready to actually start building something. So the first thing we have to do is choose our tech stack, right? So this is some of those trade-offs that we talked about earlier when we were discussing the different types of applications. Do I need speed and performance? Well, I'm going to go native. Am I new to development? Well, maybe I'm going to stick with a cross-development app because they can be a little more beginner-friendly. Do I need to launch fast? Is cost and time something I need to take into consideration? Do I need to have access to all of the features? And you can kind of look at them side by side and decide, based on what you're wanting to do and what you're wanting to build, what's best for you. For me, it's cross-platform. I chose Flutter. I knew that it didn't need to be super fast. It just needed to be good enough. I knew that I wanted one single code base for both of, I wanted to deploy to both app stores. Like I knew that from the beginning. I wanted to be on iOS and I wanted to be on Android. I knew that I did not need top of the line UX, UI quality. I knew I did not need access to every single feature. So it just made more sense for me to go that direction. From here, development is just like any other coding or development, whether it's a web app, whether it's in Python, whether it's C#. There is some sort of code editor that we develop in. We use some sort of version control to track our changes and modifications to our code and make sure that we have a way to restore those changes. There's also the ability to use no-code tools and low-code tools. I'll talk to those in a second. Each of the applications, frameworks, and app platforms have their own IDE. So if you're building an iOS, there's an IDE from Apple called Xcode. You actually have to have Xcode and have to have a physical iOS device and a Mac in order to build and deploy any app on the iOS store. So if you want to build on iOS, you're going to have to invest in a Mac device in order, or know someone who has one to let you actually compile and build the end app. Android Studio is for building Android devices. This can be on both systems. This is, basically an IDE specifically designed for Kotlin and developing Android apps. You can use VS Code to do everything in these applications as well. There's nothing that says you cannot. Some of the tooling in Android Studio for like choosing which version of Android you want to run your apps on, or for the command line tools, those might not all be available in a third-party IDE like VS Code, but for the most part, you can still get by. You could write, your Kotlin and Java and everything in VS Code as well. For cross-platform, React Native and Flutter, I recommend going with VS Code or something like Cursor if you want like an AI IDE experience, because they have access to a whole bunch of plugins. There's a Flutter plugin that just makes like building and writing Flutter code and Dart code so nice and easy. You can run virtual devices directly from the IDE. It has syntax highlighting, all those pieces, so it's really great. Git, use GitHub, use GitLab, Bitbucket, some other version control system. If you're not familiar with those, no matter what you're going to do in technology and development, you're going to use Git. So learn it. The last thing here is for development of mobile apps, you can get away with building an MVP completely using no code and low code tools. So these are things where you don't have to write a single line of code in the case of no code, or it might be a very simple only a couple lines of code, or a very simple programming language in the case of the low code tools. And these are really more for rapid development. These are applications like Bubble, Funkable. Flutter has one specifically called Flutter Flow, and they're essentially drag and drop, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get app builders. They can be very fast. There's no coding required. It's great for testing an idea. They have very limited customization. Whatever that tool has decided you can do is what you can do. There's not a lot of the kind of extending the functionality. They're not as scalable as coding from scratch. If you think there's ever going to be any traction of your application, you can get a lot of tech debt really quickly, things I have to go back and make changes to or fix or improve. So those are things where, like, yeah, if you want to really like test an idea real quick, these are great. If you're really wanting to develop a long-lasting application that you want to build a community for or something, they may not be the right way to go, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're still perfectly viable. If you are going to develop a application that has a backend, you might want to think about how you do that. As a single solo developer, if I want to be administering my servers, and do I want to be worrying about my server security and my database security, and how do I have my database set up, and how do I handle authentication, and okay, well, now I've got authentication handled, but what if someone needs to do a password reset? I don't want to do those things, mainly because that's too much for a single person, and it's also a whole bunch of other things that I don't know how to do, so I have to go learn how to do them. So that's where things like backends as a service come in, to where I don't have to build all those pieces. I can essentially drop API calls from these services into my application, and they'll handle that for me. These are things like Firebase. This is a proprietary backend as a service out of Google. AWS has their own version of this as well. I'm sure Azure does as well. They'll handle authentication. They'll do your database, your cloud storage. They'll handle your push notifications, all of those pieces. They can have serverless functions. And then there's the one I use, which is called Supabase. This is an open source alternative to Firebase. I have only ever used the free tier. I have not had a single reason yet. None of my apps have ever gotten big enough to where I have to get off of the free tier and onto the paid tier. But this has a Postgres database hooked up, so I can have a database that is having information. It takes care of my authentication. I can send reset emails through it. I use another service to handle my SMTP, which is like the simple mail transfer protocol, something that's actually sending the emails. I use another service to handle that because I don't want to set that up and manage my own SMTP server. So these are where, like, as a solo developer, you have to have trade-offs of how much responsibility do I want to take on and develop versus how much am I willing to offload to something that provides that as a service, whether that's either through cost trade-off or some sort of vendor lock-in, something along those lines. But for the most part, you can build a beginning of an app and get started all on free tiers of these things. You don't have to spend a dime until you're really starting to push the limits of those free tiers. Obviously, having some sort of API access, if you need to be able to do something, whether it's make HTTP requests or use GraphQL or anything like that, you can still do that on these backend services. And then your app can just call and connect and work with those. There's SDKs for Supabase. So there's a developer kit for Supabase in React Native. There's one specifically for Flutter. I think Firebase has one for Flutter and React. They have them for Swift and Kotlin as well, where you import and you can create your connection to that database in a single line of code instead of having to set everything up. You'll have your private key and your public key to interact with that. So a couple of takeaways. Always plan first. Use some sort of wireframing or sketching or something and define what your MVP is going to be. Pick the right tools that you're wanting to work with. Leverage a backend as a service if you need a backend so that you don't have to build those servers out from scratch. Go look for specific APIs that you need to use instead of recreating an API if you can. After we have done our building, now it's time to come in and start testing our application. So there's a couple of different things and types of testing that we can do. We have manual testing. We go in and we actually check, does this do the thing it's supposed to do? Then we have automated testing. This is where you've written your unit tests. There are items that these will run automatically as I push something to Git in my CI/CD pipeline, or you can run them and check all your tests to make sure that logic has passed. Unfortunately, the reality is you likely need a combination of both of these. UI UX testing really benefits more from manual testing. Does it look the way it's supposed to look? Is it moving the way it's supposed to move? Did the animation look weird, or the particles off? Or overflowing pixels onto one side of the device. There are getting some frameworks that can do more of that UI UX testing in an automated fashion, but it still, at the end of the day, requires people to come in and touch it and move things around and check it. Now, the great thing is that can be you. You can deploy during development. I can plug my phone in and I can run my app on my phone, or I can use a virtual device. We'll talk about that in a moment. But these can be very time consuming. It can be hard to catch all of those bugs consistently. Then there's automated testing. These we can run tests automatically, saves us time. We can make sure that we get consistent results across updates. Every time I change something, let's make sure that that feature still is doing the thing it's supposed to be doing and acting the way it's supposed to be acting. But it does require you to set those up. Think about what those tests are beforehand. Make sure that you have all that scripting enabled. Make sure that you didn't write a bug into your test. That's always fun. So it really is, like I said, like a combination. Use manual testing more for how the look and the feel of the application runs, and then automated testing for things that you can actually check a kind of definitive discrete outcome for, like logging in, database queries, how some sort of business logic functions. Device simulators versus real devices. So Xcode will allow you to simulate an iOS device. You can pull up, I'll do it right here. I mean, this is an emulator, right? So this is for Android, essentially acts as a phone. I can sit here and scroll around, move around through things. I can click on stuff. It will do things. And it is essentially a way that as I'm building, I can actually interact with my application and understand what it's doing. Android allows you to choose different phone types. iOS lets you choose different phone types. So I can say, well, what does it look like if I run it on, the Galaxy S23 versus if I run it on the Pixel 9? What if I want to look at it on an iPad versus on, an iPhone 16 SE? I don't know what the iPhones are. I don't have one. The benefit of this is they're very quick to set up. I can test a bunch of different devices. They're free. The problem is it doesn't fully mimic real world performance. So like if I wanted to like zoom, pinch to zoom, like I can't pinch to zoom on the device. If I wanted to use the gyrometer in it to understand like the positioning, I can't do that. So like then you need a real device. So that's how you can test the apps and how it performs, test specific hardware features. Really is something that you really need to be doing before you launch it to the App Store. Don't think just because it's working on my emulator, then it's got to work on the devices. So what I'll do is I'll usually develop and start building in the emulator, and then as I get much further along and I'm ready to like test some features out more fully, I'll move it over to my personal phone and I'll kind of play with it there. If I'm testing it on Android, I do have an iPad and I will check it on that. But if I need to test it on iPhones, I will look into testing services. So these are things like Firebase Test Lab or Browser Stack, Sauce Labs, and these are specifically services that let me test across a wide range of devices. I'm not going to go buy every different type of phone that there is. So I can run all those. They essentially have a physical device somewhere running that I can connect to at the cloud. I can install my application on it. I can do automated test reports across those. I can actually interact with it and get a better understanding to make sure that it's working on a broad range of devices. This may be overkill for a lot of applications. If you don't need to know that it works and you don't care if it works, on older devices or that it's, running exactly the same on every single device, you may not opt to do this. For my first app that I deployed, I did not do this. But I think if I were to be trying to build a more, larger following or really try to get an app more traction, these are definitely things that I would recommend doing. Okay, so we've built it. Now we've got to actually get it out to where people can download it and install it. It's not good to anyone if they can't access it. And that's where the app stores really do come in. So we'll look at the difference between the two. So for the iOS, you do have to have Xcode to deploy. There's a whole signing part of your application. I have a key that I have to embed into my app. Apple has the other part of that key. They make sure to say, okay, this app really did come from the developer we said developed it. So we can say David Brundage actually wrote this app. We're verifying it. It's good to go. And Xcode allows you to do that. It has a deployment process. It makes it much simpler to do. You have to have that developer account I mentioned, so that's $99 a year. And then you use App Store Connect, which we'll look at here in a minute, to actually manage your app. They have a built-in beta testing process with something called Test Flight. You can upload a beta version of your app, and you can go get real users and say, hey, go check this out on Test Flight. They can pull it down, they can start testing it and reading it, giving you feedback, and you can fix bugs that they might find before releasing it. Once you're ready to test, you've got everything that you're ready to do, and you want to publish it to the App Store, you've got to prepare the app. So that's making sure that it meets Apple's guidelines. They have a pretty strict set of guidelines for apps. Some things they say, hey, this isn't worthy of being an app. One of my apps was rejected. They said this isn't an app in our eyes. They say it's a static website. I disagree, but they want me to go back in and add more native features. They want it to be worth being put onto their application or to their app store. You have to come up with a name. You have to come up with a description. You need an icon. You need to have screenshots that people can view and market. You can build all these yourself. There's also tools that will allow you. I use a tool called like App Screenshots, I think is what it was. And it's a paid service, but it made making these screenshots look much nicer and much easier. I could export them in the format that, Android needs them in. I can export them in the format that iOS needs them in. There is a manual review process that your app has to go through. So once you fill all that out, you've uploaded it, you answer questions about it, you submit it, Apple will download it on a phone, someone will go through, they will start using your app, and they will decide whether you get to release it or not. It's relatively quick. They say it can take up to a week. I have not had one take longer than a day yet. I have had one that got through this app I'm showing here, high certified, got through no issues. First time through, I was shocked. It was my first app that I'd ever built. I was perfectly expecting it to come back with a whole bunch of things that I had to fix. And then I had one that I thought was great, and I was like, this is going to crush. It's going to be so easy. It's better than this one. And they rejected it. So it really is. And they'll tell you why they rejected it. They'll list it out, well, you need to do these things. You need to make sure this does this. And they'll give you some general feedback, but it's not always the best. After it's been through that review, it goes live. People can find it on the App Store and they can start downloading it. Google Play works a little bit differently. Again, there's a fee to join the program. You have to, again, sign the app bundle file for submission. So that's you uploading your code for them to deploy. There are testing stages that Google wants you to go through. You do not, so the internal testing and the alpha testing are not mandatory, but for any app, for any new personal developers. So my account is a personal developer account. You can have a business account, but for a personal developer account, you have to go through a closed beta testing period. So what this is you have to find 12 people to join the beta test of your application, and they have to be in the beta test and using your application for 14 days continuously. If you drop below 12 people for one of those 14 days, your time resets until you get 12 people back up, and then it starts back from 1, and it goes over again. If you have the business account, you do not have to do that. And I'm thinking about switching over to a business account just so I can stop doing this testing. It's actually a little annoying because I don't have 14 people that I can be like, hey, go download my app and test it for 14 days, or 12 people for 14 days. There are communities that try and help people out. It's hit or miss on whether you'll get people to actually use it for 14 days. When I was building my first app, I was lucky that I was part of a community that was asking for this application, and I told people that I was like, hey, if you test this, I will give it to you for free. And so I got enough testers very easily to get through this. Then you do the same process more or less on Android. You have to come up with the same description information, screenshots, answer questions. You've got to get your application rated. iOS does all this too. Make sure it's right for people. Choose a category. Is it an education app? Is it a game? Is it business? There's certain restrictions on some application types. If it's a news application, or if you are doing any sort of gambling or cryptocurrency, you have additional things that you have to fill out. But otherwise, once it's gone through that 14-day period, Google will then do their review, and then once they approve it, it can then be launched to the App Store. Then you can update them any point in time after you've done that, but those are the experience with both of those. Reasons that you could be rejected. Bugs or crashes are the number 1 reasons. If people are opening things up and it's crashing or it's not working correctly, they'll reject it. They'll tell you to fix it. Privacy violations. I have a privacy policy that's in a public GitHub repo that I'll link to for any of my apps. I have a website specifically for my paid app that has a privacy policy, and those are linked to both of those. If there's any sort of user interface or user experience issues, if a button isn't working or doesn't look right, or the accessibility is off, they may reject it for those reasons. If you're doing any sort of misleading content or any like false content, they can reject it for those. And really the way to fix these from either app store is more testing and reading the guidelines, looking at the reports, correcting the items, and resubmitting. Sometimes it can take 3 or 4 submissions before it actually gets through. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about, I think, is monetization. There are different ways that you can monetize your app. You don't need to monetize your app. You can make it perfectly free, get it out there to anyone you want. But if you want to monetize and try and make some sort of side income or try and make a business, there are different ways that you can monetize your application, and each one of them has their own trade-offs. So you can have a paid app. What mine is, it's $4.99. Every time someone wants to download and install it, they pay $4.99. There's things called in-app purchases. So this is where your app is completely free, and inside your app, you may offer tokens that people buy, or you may offer them, purchases to extend the storage in your cloud server, or things like that. This is often combined with the freemium model, so it's free up until a certain point, and then you pay for a bit more, and you usually do that through in-app purchases. You can do advertising. There are tools like Google AdMob that allow you to put banner ads or interstitial ads to where they pop up in between things. And those are primarily seen a lot more with like high volume apps and like games. A lot of times if your app has ads in it, especially like interstitial ads or ads that like interrupt the workflow, people usually remove your app. Like it's just not something that I know I don't want ads in my application. Unless you are giving me something so wonderful that I'm willing to sit through an ad, or if it's just like a really discrete banner ad, then maybe I'm okay with it. Freemium, like I said, is kind of combined with that in-app purchase. It's free to download, but there's additional premium things that you can purchase. And the last one, which has probably become the most common for a lot of applications, is a subscription model. So you pay $4 a month for something. There's different tiers based on the features that you want, and more features of your application are locked behind those higher purchase tiers. So paid apps. User pays upfront, downloads the app. Common for premium tools, games, and niche apps. It's immediate revenue per download. There's no ads, so usually a better user experience. It's usually harder to convince people to pay for something up front that they cannot test and see. Google and Apple take 30% of everything you make. So just know that up front, whatever you're charging, mine's $4.99. I see about $3.20 of every sale. You'll hear people call it the Apple tax or the Google tax, and it exists. Then you've got things like the freemium model. So the app is free, and then you have additional services that you can purchase. You can usually get a larger user base this way because it's free to download. More people are willing to try something for free, so they can try it before committing it. But then you've got to figure out like what's the balance of what is free versus what are paid features. Some people might say, I really want more of that for free, or you're not giving me enough. Then see here, the subscription model. It's predictable, steady income. This is usually recurring revenue. These are more for like the software as a service apps. It's hard to convince people to subscribe. It requires you to continuously put out updates and new content. Nobody's going to pay for just like one static thing, recurring or monthly. These are usually streaming services, education platforms, tools, productivity apps. And then there's the in-app ads piece. High traffic apps, games, news, social media, works well for free apps, no need for users to pay. Can annoy users if overused, or the targeted ads might not be relevant. You have to disclose that your app has ads. So like when you go through that deployment process, you have to say, hey, I use ads in my application. This is from RevenueCat. RevenueCat is a service that lets you handle in-app purchases because you have to do those in a very specific way on the app stores. Once again, they get 30% of any of your in-app purchases as well. So Google and Apple are always getting theirs. But the thing to take away from here is the top 5% of apps generate 200 times more the revenue than the bottom quartile makes after 1 year. The median monthly revenue an app for subscription-based apps generates is a little bit under $50 in a year. So it's a tough market out there. Like, let's be clear, it's not easy to make money. You can make money in these services, but it really is kind of the top of the top that are actually making a large portion. The median amount is usually making much less. Just like websites have search engine optimization, apps have app store optimization to help you rank higher in your search results. So these are in your keywords, your title, your description, how your screenshots and videos work, things like that. I think that if I search for my RHIT study app, mine comes up on the first page, but it's very specific. This is not me. Whoever this is above me by one for Google Play. I don't know why my app isn't ranking on Google Play. So I've got to figure that part out. So some differences between the two markets. iOS users spend more. It is a fact. I can tell you that I have gotten probably close to 3 times the amount of downloads and installs from iOS that I have from Android. So it does work well for paid apps and subscriptions. Android tends to get more downloads for free apps. They have a larger pool, more people tend to download them. They both can range anywhere from a day to a week for approval. They both take the same amount of cut from as you get into higher tiers. There are different programs that you can get into that take less money from you, but for the most part, 30%. iOS has a stronger presence in the US and EU, where Android has a stronger presence in emerging markets. Typically, users have more spending power in iOS, and then there's a higher download but less spending power on the Android side. Choose a monetization strategy that fits your app and audience. Decide what you want to do. If you want to monetize, if you're trying to build an application to actually make an income, think about that. Think about how to use that app store optimization, and then understand the difference between the two. I've just got a couple of little things here for documentation. I noticed I was running out of time, so I started speeding up there towards the end. So I'll open it up for questions, and then I can show off anything if anyone wants to see something. Okay, we can look at the App Store piece. Actually, we'll do this first. We'll look at the mobile app. So this is my mobile app. This is High Certify, and I just built a new feature in, which is a dark mode. I got my MVP out first, and then I was like, all right, I want dark mode. So I have this button here that switches between the two. And I've noticed as I'm doing my testing, I have this memory match game, which is supposed to give you a memory match, and it'll give you a definition, and then somewhere there's a term, and you got to match the definition to the term. This is like a training education game. And I noticed that in dark mode, when I do my memory match game and I click on this, I can't see any of my text in my this dialog box here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to update that real fast to make that text a different color. It's in this dialog box here. So everything in Flutter is a widget. So this show dialog box widget here is a dialog. And you can see here I have a container in that. And inside that container, I have, or inside this container, I have some text, this text widget right here. It has a style. And all I'm going to do here is change the font color. Maybe. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna change that to black. And then so we'll save that. And then I'm gonna come out of here, go back into that. And it didn't work because of course it didn't work because live demos. Oh, I'm doing this in the wrong. Well, instead of making you watch me troubleshoot it and figure it out. But I'll go in, I'd add that after I'd have that updated, then I would work through my deployment piece. Here is what App Store Connect. So this is for iOS. This is kind of what the backend looks like, where I put in all my screenshots, update my description. Here are my keywords for my App Store optimization. Here's where I have to put in, all of my privacy policy pieces of information. If I had any promo codes, all of that's available here. You can see the analytics from your app in App Store. So you can see from February 1st, I only had 916 impressions on my app. I had 20 downloads. I made a little under $70. And this is all decreased a lot. If we look at the app from this perspective, so if I go to sales and trends, and I don't know why this website sucks on Windows. It runs fine when you're on a Mac, but to get App Store Connect to do anything on Windows is like pulling teeth. Okay, so once that will load, we can go and look at so proceeds, and we will look at since I released it. So I've made $388 on this application since I released it. And this period right here is when I was heavily marketing the application, pushing it out places. I was telling people to go download it. I was getting it into communities. And then I stopped doing that because that's a lot of work to go and make posts daily and try and get people and try and get stuff. And I'm hoping for some more organic traction. I get about 3 or 4 downloads a week. So I make about $10 a week from this app, which I'm happy with. That's great. Not trying to make millions off of this, nor do I think that this application could make millions. But it is something, it has made back my investment as far as purchasing the App Store developer programs. That's it. That's all I've got.
Thanks, David. I'm sorry, I'm joined by my little intern here who had to fit near the end of your presentation, so I had to step away. But I think that's a really cool topic that students are interested in. We've had a lot of folks either have ideas for apps that they want to create or have started to make something or just really aren't sure where to go with it. So I think this was all really useful.
Awesome. If anybody has any questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to me directly or just let me know.
So, David, how much time do you have into that app?
That's a great question. So I probably lost money if I was charging my hourly rate to myself for development. So a lot more than that. I probably spend about, I'd say 10 to 20 hours a week developing it. That app I built in just about a month and a half.
It's a good looking app.
I like it. I get positive feedback from the people that are using it. So that's why I'm trying to, like, one of the early feedback features I got was, hey, I'd really like a dark mode. Like the white is just too bright while I'm trying to study. And so I was like, cool, I'm not going to get to it anytime soon, but I will get it. And so that's what I'm working on trying to do now. I'm hoping to have that done this week, and I can push that out and at least resolve one thing on the backlog.
Excellent. So do you consider the writing of the apps as a hobby or as more of your professional? Because I know you're into just about everything, but is it fun for you to do, or is it?
It's a hobby for me 100% right now. I would love for one day maybe the hobby is something that, you know, starts making me more money. In my professional, so I am now more in a leadership position in my work roles, and I don't develop a lot anymore. So I use this as a way to where I can stay hands on keyboard and keep up some development experience and kind of get that itch out, since I don't do that as much in my professional life.
Great. Thanks for the answers.
Yeah. Brett, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is a great presentation, and I know I'm real new to the org, and I'm fascinated. I think we should. I know you volunteer your time, but I would like to connect more and talk about a lot of things.
Yeah.
If that's fine with you. So
Absolutely, reach out.
And that's a great point to your last question as well. Is as you move further away from like everyday feature development, it's good to, this is just for everyone, it's good to just find those little fun things that keep you going and coding. And you're not working on maybe like super boring inventory software anymore. And so you want to keep inspired, and it also keeps you learning new things and keeping up to speed on what all is out there. So yeah, this is a great talk. We appreciate it.
A lot of my projects, thank you. A lot of my projects usually come from a, man, I really want this, and then I'll go look for it. I'm like, oh, I can't find it. Well, I'll just go ahead and make it. And specifically, like that app, the certification app, is when I was studying. I have the certification that it's for. When I was studying for it, there were no good mobile apps. I like to like study everywhere I go, and sometimes I'm not in front of my computer, or I don't have my book, and I just want to like, you know, I'm sitting on the toilet, I got 15 minutes, I'm gonna do a quiz or something, like that type of stuff. And everyone that I found was either they wanted to charge me a monthly subscription, or they wanted to charge like $50. And like students don't have $50 that they can put out on an app. So I was like, I want to make something that is feature rich and has a bunch of different things, but is also no more than $5. So that's what I did.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the same thing, Shannon. I didn't know if you were still. If you had one more minute, David, what would you say to students who are about to finish the program and about their career coming up?
Yeah, I would say to don't worry about what is the most advanced or most current trends in the industry. Focus on just learning and picking something and working with it and getting used to it, but always keep an eye on what is changing and what direction they're going in. And eventually you learn, like, when do I need to care more about something that is new or emerging? I think a lot of times things get very scary when you're like, oh my God, but this is changing and now this, and especially with like AI and stuff like that. People are like, oh no, what about this? Just focus, keep building things. That skill's always going to be useful, and then worry about the most current or state of the art after you get your footing.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Eli?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. You talked a little bit about Flutter and Flutter Flow. Are there, I know you said you could do a few different things like in VS Studio or Visual Studio, but is there like a specific one that the community or people gravitate towards when they're developing with Flutter?
Yeah, so VS Code is the one that I think almost everyone uses. Cursor as well, if you're using, like, if you want to use that. I mean, Cursor is just a VS Code fork. And the reason I say that is VS Code has two really great extensions, one for Flutter and one for Dart. And they allow you to get things like, see how this says this has this elevated button after here. So I know that this section here all corresponds to this elevated button. It has syntax highlighting for like widgets. If I'm inside of a widget, I can hover over it and see what all of the different, by holding control, I can see like, okay, this takes it has a key, it has all these different color things, it has a decoration, it tells me like what it expects for that. And so it's just really helpful to have, and you can, it just makes it so much easier. So I'd recommend VS Code for Flutter.
And then you mentioned Dart as well with it. Are those, like, how are those two integrated, or is it based on Dart, or what's
so Flutter is built using the Dart programming language, but itself is not a programming language, it's a framework. So everything building the UIs under the hood for Flutter is done in Dart. You write Dart code to get Flutter functionality. Flutter is the UI framework. Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. I appreciate
so you have to learn Dart to do things in Flutter, but you build your UIs using Flutter.
Okay. Because I'm in the software development track, and we're using like Mud Blazor and stuff like that, and that'd be similar to Flutter, and then C# would be more of like
Correct.
Dart in that situation. Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
It's like the same thing as, like, you know, React is the framework, JavaScript is the language.
Thank you.
For sure. Laura?
I've been working with React and Vite to develop some things lately, and I was wondering, do you think that React Native would be all that much different from working with just the React framework?
Nope, React and React Native are essentially the same syntax and everything, from my understanding. So if you know React, it will be very easy for you to pick up and work with React Native. The only difference will be there will be some specific React Native items for specific, like, phone features that just aren't on the web.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Brett, did you still have a question?
Nope, sorry, didn't realize hand was still raised.
Oh, it's okay, I'm just making sure.
Thanks.
I got time for like one more question, and then I gotta go, if anybody else has anything. Yeah, Eli.
So when you're structuring the program, you kind of said you would sketch it out first. Do you typically go that route, or do some, like, are there some instances where it might be more important to like do the back end and that type of stuff?
So I find it's very hard to decide what a UI looks like if I don't know what data is being returned, and I have a very hard time understanding what data I need to return without knowing what my UI should look like. So why I do say it is best practice to do a mock-up or some sort of wireframe or something, I often find myself designing in code, which is not the best practice, and I'll iterate over things until I start getting it to look right, and then I'll start working on the back end for a little bit, and then I'll realize, oh, I actually want this feature to look like this, so then I have to modify the back end to get things to do that. When you are a solo developer, not working on a team, you can do that. Like you can be much more iterative and on the fly because you're doing both parts at the same time. In a professional setting, if you're working on a team, it might not work that way, and you'll need to focus on one set. But that's why I say indie hacking at the beginning, which is just, like I throw things together, and I don't care if I need some glue and spit and tape to make things stick together. If it works and I can get it out and into the world, that's much better to me and much more important to me than it's perfect or works very well.
Okay. And then, so when you were talking about the databases and like Firebase and stuff like that, which of the, because I just want to look into it a little bit, not necessarily start messing with it or anything, but which one would be the easiest to kind of like investigate to get a better understanding of how that works?
I love Supabase, and it is the one that I use. I do plan on trying Firebase just to see. There's a lot of people, especially in the Flutter community, that like swear by Firebase. It was one of the original backends as a service for mobile. The reason I don't use Firebase is it is a non-relational database. I prefer relational databases. Supabase lets me use Postgres, so I just am more familiar with working with that for my backend. And I've heard horror stories about people, racking up Firebase charges out the wazoo for doing something wrong. Supabase, you have to give them your credit card, but on the free tier, like they'll just shut you off if you go past your free tier. So like I have less concerns of anything on that. So I feel like I have a little more safety. And it's open source. So if I wanted to switch from them hosting, because I use their as a service, but I could self-host the exact same thing on a server and just switch where I'm pointing all my API calls to. So if I wanted to transition off, I could do that and still have the same, app essentially without having to change a lot.
Then one more question kind of on what you were just saying. When you're saying specifically like relational database, what are you meaning by that term?
Sure.
In this context, I guess.
Sure. So relational database in this term specifically means that I have a primary key and a foreign key in a table, and I can join those tables together and extend it or grab information from one or the other. So they use a NoSQL database, so it's essentially like a document. It's a JSON. It's kind of like JSON. It's a key value pair to store your data. It makes harder to do that relationship part. You can still do it, and you can still perfectly function just fine. If you've heard of MongoDB, that's a NoSQL non-relational database versus like Postgres or MySQL. In my app that I showed you all, it uses a SQLite database. There's not even a database that I connect to. It's all on the application. So it's like it works offline, all those pieces. That's what I mean. Like you don't have to have a backend depending on what you're trying to do. It can all run on the phone.
I have another question based on what you just said there. Because we're using I'm using specifically SQLite for like the Capstone project and stuff. And that what that does, I guess specifically, is like make a database within that actual like item that's running it, I guess, or whatever, instead of trying to set one up outside of the program per se. Like is kinda
okay. So SQLite is essentially a file representation of SQL. It stores everything as a file. Almost every app that you have on your phone probably has a SQLite database somewhere for storing something. But it's essentially just a file. Whereas like Postgres is a database that needs a server to host and run that. You don't need any of that server things for SQLite because it's just a file and it interacts with it as a file. And so it's very light, it's very small, it's very fast, it doesn't require as much, and that's why a lot of times it'll be used for parts of your application.
Oh, okay. That was something I did not know.
Yes.
I was really curious about that too, because I was wondering what the detail was that I was missing and what the difference was, and it was just that. Yeah. I think that's all I got.
Cool. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Let me know anything. My door is always open. Just send me a message.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.